So we didn't exactly have to wait as long for the third observation by Opeth as we had for the second. The second one came after 2 years between 1994 to 1996. And the third observation came just about a year later, and this would set up something that really shows how Opeth really pays attention to detail. The somewhat irregularity of their releases sometimes is something that is seen by a lot of people as the reason why they're excellent. The one thing about this is that you would think that for a band that typically waits about 2 to 3 years between releases, perhaps one that was only released 1 year after its predecessor would maybe be a little bit substandard. However, the album that was released, My Arms, Your Hearse, is far from it. In fact, this could also, like the first two, be seen as a real defining album in this band's career. The recording style for this particular record is still kind of that same rough edge that you heard with the previous two. However, it was a little bit more clean, a little bit more of a trial and error type thing, heading towards what you would hear from Still Life, Blackwater Park, and the others, which were recorded with fantastic software, with fantastic equipment that made the band itself sound at its best. However, the rough edge recording of My Arms, Your Hearse actually works really, really well. Mainly because it portrays the atmosphere with this bliss and beauty. That's something that you can only find on these first two Opeth releases. Excuse me, three. Not to say that the other ones don't have added atmosphere that's beautiful. In fact, each and every release has its own atmosphere to it that's absolutely exceptional and really either portrays the emotion of grief very well, it portrays the emotion of anger very well. Basically, any emotion that the boys are attempting to convey is conveyed exceptionally through the recording software and the atmosphere that they are able to create with their songwriting. My Arms, Your Hearse is kind of a unique record. Whenever you think of a concept album, so to speak, you always think about each and every song serving a purpose in telling a story. This is something that's very true with Opeth's My Arms, Your Hearse as well. However, it's something that's done in a very unique format. Whenever you take a listen and read along with it, you notice that instead of getting this journal pages that I was speaking about with the previous two, you get this large, almost one large story format that you see in the book. And another interesting thing about this is that each and every song ends with the song title of the next track. The next track will be the last word or words that you hear in the song. Perfectly good example. There is an introduction that leads into April Ethereal. April Ethereal is the first track on the record. And as you read all the way through, it does not stop until you get to the second track, which is, of course, Win, then goes to Madrigal, Amen Corner, etc. So even with the tracks that are serving as just an instrumental to kind of move you along in the story, there is some text that is kind of that's in there to advance the story further. This is something that I have never seen in a metal album before and have never seen since. And if there is one that exhibits this, then please let me know. However, I think this is something that is so unique that it's only been done one time by the band Opeth. And once again, like the previous two, you're just seeing the traditional Opeth insignia up there on the top left-hand corner. You're not seeing the title of the album anywhere. You're just seeing the desolate scene. This is something that's now been common for 3 straight albums. It's something that's really awesome. Now, like my copy of Orchid, this copy of My Arms, Your Hearse is not an original, which is something that I will, of course, rectify with ease, considering this is something I can still find. However, I wanted this particular version of the album because it also contained, at that time, the only 2 Opeth covers that existed at the time, which was a cover of Circle of the Tyrants by Celtic Frost, as well as a cover of Remember Tomorrow, of course, by Iron Maiden. And both of the covers are done very, very well. In fact, it's something that you really would expect them to do a Celtic Frost cover, and you'd expect Mikkel to really shine on this particular cover. However, the Remember Tomorrow cover is also extremely memorable. Now, of course, the band has gone on to cover such acts such as Deep Purple with their song Soldier of Fortune, as well as covering Alice in Chains' Wood, which is, let me tell you, that's a hell of a cover, the likes of which I think Lane Staley and Andrew Wood both would be turning in their graves to listen with both ears as opposed to maybe just with one. I guess it really depends on how they're buried, but it's kind of a morbid joke that I'm not going to get into. As far as the music on My Arms, Your Hearse, this is nothing short of fantastic. This is, in fact, an album that proves what I was able to kind of start to exhibit on the previous record, Morning Rise, that this is a band that just continues to get better and better with each passing release. Of course, with Morning Rise, you saw that they exampled a little bit more of the longer track affairs that's more evident in progressive music, and kind of tweaked it with their own personal style. Now, with My Arms, Your Hearse, they kind of revert back to having lengthy compositions. However, there's enough on there to kind of advance the story. There's not a song on this record that surpasses 10 minutes. So this is kind of a unique little element that we did not see on a release by Opeth until we reached Damnation many, many years later. And this is not something that holds this album back whatsoever. It's in fact something that causes it to be very strong. It's an album that's very free-flowing, and an album that is very, very easy for a listener to take in. And perhaps this is something that turned a lot of those fans that listened to Orchid and Morning Rise and didn't really get into it very much into hardcore fans of Opeth. You're still seeing the same edge of Opeth. You're still seeing the same progression of Opeth that you would get on the first two releases. However, this time it's done a little bit more individually. It's still something that you see on in multiple purposes on a single track. However, you also see songs that exhibit just one side once again. We haven't seen instrumentals, for example, on an Opeth record since back at Orchid. So whenever you hear a madrigal on this particular release or the epilogue, it's something that is very unique. It's something that, like I said, advances the story and captures your ear. However, you're also hearing, once again, Opeth kind of doing a softer side with the song Credence, which occurs after my favorite song of Opeth, maybe of all time. I know I said that about Black Rose Immortal, but I may be actually rethinking my whole idea on that particular concept merely because Black Rose Immortal set up the remainder of their career. However, Demon of the Fall is really an elevated and beloved track in their catalog, and it's one that I've probably listened to the most times out of any song in their catalog. Then again, I've listened to the entire catalog countless numbers of times, which is the reason why they'll probably be the first band to reach 2,000 plays on my Last FM account. The Credence really shows that this is a band that's once again able to perform an entire song with a very light and melodic edge. This is where Mikkel's vocals once again almost resemble metal pop in a certain format. However, it's very creepy and very haunting. It's something that really sticks with a listener, and that's also its power. It's its power and majesty that it's able to do that. Now, there are, of course, tracks where, like I said, they blend and blur the edges a little bit. In fact, Demon of the Fall does so kind of as a night and day philosophy. The first part of the song is probably the most brutal track that you're going to hear on the record. Now, there, of course, are moments where they reach the same brutality on tracks such as Karma as well as in Win. However, you hear it a lot more. It's a lot more evident on Demon of the Fall, especially in that beginning, that dissonant part that just borders on insanity. And it's a really, really cool opening riff. Like I said on Morning Rise with the song The Night in the Silent Water, once again, this is a band that definitely can write riffs that get stuck in your head. And Demon of the Fall is an exceptional example of that fact. You almost have to pause for a cigarette whenever you're talking about this release, because I could go on talking about it forever and a day. However, the most evident thing that you need to think about and that you need to digest from this particular album review is the fact that this is an all-time classic. This would be the album that I would probably put at number 2 or maybe number 3 on their catalog, which means we're still getting to the best albums in my opinion. In fact, this starts a stretch that involves all 3 of my favorite albums back to back to back, which is really awesome. Which means that one of the next 2 records is my favorite Opeth record, while the other one is potentially number 2 or number 3. Really just seems like through CDs number 3 through 5, Opeth really found their groove. They wrote some of the best music of their career, and this is not to say that anything that they released after Blackwater Park is substandard. But believe you me, it certainly all is fantastic music. However, this is just a stretch of albums that hits me in a different way, in a different light. These are the records that I could spin over and over and over again with very little thought. It's something that whenever I think of an Opeth CD that I want to listen to, I don't have to randomly decide. These are the 3 that are going to come up the most often in my decision, and the rest of them will certainly be something that will be dependent upon the day, the hour, the song that I really want to listen to. And, of course, I can't just listen to one track. It's something where I have to listen to an entire record. Opeth is one of those rare bands that gives me that particular alternative, and I always want to take that alternative. It's not something where I just listen to one track or two and want to stop, even though my Last FM may say that I do. So, My Arms, Your Hearse, this may be the one album, Opeth fans, that is a little bit more accessible to those of you who did not get into the first two. If you're a new fan, this would be a place maybe to start. However, I would still say if you really wanted to start with Blackwater Park. It's the album that really made their career into what it was and really magnified everything that they had done to maybe 13, since I mentioned them going up to 12 on Morning Rise. However, My Arms, Your Hearse still remains to me as one of the most classic albums of all time, and it's one of those releases that will haunt you and haunt your memory for the remainder of your existence. Whether or not it would be a true concept album, by definition, this is something that maybe still remains to be seen. However, if it is, it tells a fantastic story. If you were to read the lyrics, it's exceptionally poetic and well thought out, and the music certainly goes along very well. Of course, with the format that I have it on, the two fantastic covers definitely do not slow down or just kill the momentum of this particular release. Once the story is over and the covers begin, you are still knee-deep in a fantastic Opeth release. And you know, if it ends up not being a concept album by the opinions of many metal fans, metal elite, metal reporters, metal media, whatever, it doesn't really matter. It's still a fantastic album regardless, and that's the one thing that you should take from this record. Hands down, fantastic release. Hands down, if you're contemplating getting into this band, this is definitely a good place to go. Hands down, one of my top three. We're going to get to the other two, and we're going to get to them soon. Stay tuned.